In Unit 13, we're going to take a look at the period between World War I and World War II. In this particular lesson, we're going to take a look at conditions in America in the period just after World War I. Unfortunately, the period immediately after World War I, the United States was in a recession or an economic slowdown. And this makes sense because the factories that were producing the war materials no longer needed to produce the war materials, so they shut down and laid their employees off. Additionally, for farmers who were providing food during the war for France as well as soldiers, with the war ending, those farmers in Europe were going to be able to go back to growing their crops, and there was going to be less of a demand for American farm products overseas. Unfortunately, the people being displaced out of the factory jobs were largely African American and women, and as the text shows here, we have a number of race riots the summer of 1919 throughout the United States, as the map indicates here. And this was caused for a number of reasons, not the least of which was the competition for available jobs, the jobs that were remaining in this recessionary period. For the workers that did have work to go to, or job to go to, this was a period of high inflation, and their wages did not keep up with inflation, so a number of workers opted to go on strike looking for an increase in wages. And unfortunately, this only exacerbated the difficult conditions existing in the United States at that point. The 1920s also gave rise to our first Red Scare. Red means communist, and this was a fear of communists. The headlines here indicate the concern that was taking place, in this instance in Lowell, Massachusetts, but this was a nationwide issue. You'll remember during World War I that Russia bowed out of the war, signing a quick peace agreement with Germany. You may remember that the Bolshevik Revolution led to Russia becoming a communist country, later the Soviet Union. Anyway, the concern on our end was that immigrants were coming in with these communist leanings, pro-communist sympathies, and many of them were anarchists, people that didn't want any kind of government at all. So Attorney General Mitchell Palmer conducted raids, arresting thousands of radicals, immigrants, and the issue here is that the immigrants were often rounded up and deported, never having been charged with a crime, never having any of their due process rights. So this was a tremendous violation of American citizens' due process rights from the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments, the right to be arrested and charged with a crime, and witnesses, a jury trial, etc. What it did lead to, though, were immigration restrictions, specifically the Immigration Acts of 1921 and 24. This is the first time this country is going to begin setting quotas or specific limits on the numbers of immigrants coming in from particular areas. The Sacco and Vanzetti trial shows or highlights the anti-immigrant sentiment at the time. Here you have two Italian immigrants who were self-proclaimed anarchists that were accused of murder, and they were tried, but at the time the newspapers indicated that the evidence was a little bit flimsy, that in fact there may have been an anti-immigrant bias. Here you can see the two of them. Because the evidence was, the case that the government put together was not as sound as it could have been, and as you can see from the notes here, they were executed in 1927. This highlighted at the time, again, the anti-immigrant sentiment felt in America, and how individuals may indeed have had their rights violated. Here, in this instance, we might have executed uh, two men that were not guilty of the crime that they were convicted of. Turning away from the Red Scare, Americans wanted to get back to the way things were before the war. They were very war-weary after World War I. They were not interested in the goings-on around the rest of the world and feared very much getting involved in another foreign conflict. Warren Harding, who was running for president and, as you can see, elected to office, tapped into that sentiment with his campaign slogan that was known as a return to normalcy, attempt to bring America back to the way it was before the war. And this resonated with Americans, and we're going to move from Democratic president Woodrow Wilson to a Republican president with Warren G. Harding. Unfortunately for Harding, he may have been a fairly upstanding individual, but the people that he chose for high-level cabinet positions, high-level government positions, were not ethical and moral people. So his administration was plagued by a series of scandals. And these photos indicate the biggest scandal of his administration. This was known as the Teapot Dome scandal. We see here Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall, who took a bribe from an oil company to lease government lands specifically to this company, bypassing the normal bidding process. He got caught. He was tried and convicted, and the first cabinet official to ever go to jail. You'll notice that Harding's presidency was short. He died of a heart attack about 2 years into his presidency. A lot of people say that this was due to the stress of the various scandals that plagued his administration, which again was due to the fact that he chose friends of his from Ohio, where he was from, who were less than ethical in doing their jobs. And this quote by Harding really sums up that sentiment. I have no trouble with my enemies. I can take care of my enemies in a fight, but my friends, they're the ones who keep me walking the floor at nights. Referring, of course, to the various scandals that they got caught up in and embarrassed the president in. So then, just to sum up, after World War I, unfortunately, the U.S. entered a recession, leading to race riots, high inflation, and unemployment. Warren Harding was elected president by promising a return to normalcy, which is incorrect English, and at the time the press made fun of him, as they do many presidents that misspeak accidentally. However, he used them being the press poking fun at him, to turn it into the campaign slogan that led to his election, the return to normalcy. Harding's president, as we said, was a short one, and it was marred by scandals, the biggest of which was the Teapot Dome scandal. By the way, Teapot Dome is an area in Wyoming, and it was the leased land in Teapot Dome, Wyoming, that led to the scandal, the bribe that was taken to lease the land that for which the scandal is named.